Hello everyone, and welcome to the 6th episode of Analyzing Good, featuring Chester Bennington from Linkin Park. Now, Analyzing Good will mostly be dedicated to people I admire rather than hate. And even though I'm not a music guy, the more I started to look into the story of this musician, the more respect I've grown for the man. He is, of course, no longer with us, as he sadly passed away in 2017. But as I've noticed, to specific fans of rock music, he lives on in them. Today, I wanted to go into the story, reputation, and overall legacy of the former lead singer of Linkin Park. So without further ado, let's begin. When it comes to me personally, I got into Linkin Park's music the same way I'm sure a lot of other people did. Michael Bay's Transformers. You come to get attached to the end credits song, which at this rate is worthy meme music, and you can put it over any ending to any story. And when they followed it up with new songs for the 2 sequels that came out afterwards, before they ran it into the ground with Age of Extinction and The Last Night, they were fire. Then it's a matter of looking into the other songs the band did, and I discovered jams like In the End, Numb, and Burn It Down, among others. And suddenly, you're a fan of the music. Again, I'm not a music guy, but if I'm gonna sit down to listen to some music, it's probably going to be What I've Done or New Divide. Iridescent has started to grow on me more and more, but the point is, it's not just meme music. It got me attached to the band itself. I'm very hard to please music-wise, but Linkin Park scratched that itch a lot. Then I start looking into the band's history, and I learn that the lead singer, Chester Bennington, is no longer with us, and he's been gone for years. But despite dying at the age of 41, he has a hell of a story to tell. Chester Bennington was born on the 20th of March, 1976 in Phoenix, Arizona. And right off the bat, he led a troubled life, as early on, at the age of 7, he had an older male friend who did, non-consensual terrible stuff to him for 6 years onwards, and Chester was reluctant to tell his parents, because he didn't want to be accused of being gay or lying. Keep in mind the timeline of this would have been in the 1980s. Now, I wouldn't necessarily say that his older friend is the villain of Chester's story. As it turns out, his friend suffered from the same issues he did, and it was a case of deflection onto someone else. It's also why we don't know who his friend actually was. And that potentially means that the individual had a second chance at life. This abuse pretty much damaged Chester mentally, and while this is where the creative spark comes from, there was also a continued downside. His use of drugs resulted in weight loss and a skeletal appearance, which led to him being bullied at school. And Chester didn't attempt to fully fix his bad habits until the age of 16, when he and his friends were mugged by a gang while high. Although overcoming the addiction wasn't easy, Chester would afterwards resort to alcohol, a lesser but still harmful substance to cope with the lack of drugs, which practically created a new addiction for alcohol. Chester's first venture into music was with some personal friends, in the short-lived band known as Grey Days. However, he ended up leaving the band in 1998, but then came the golden moment, when another band, then known as Hybrid Theory, who were looking for a strong central singer, and Chester managed to win the audition in a complete blowout with his singing talent, became the lead singer of Hybrid Theory. The band was forced to change its name when they finally found a record label that was willing to publish their songs, and thus they changed their name to Linkin Park. Linkin being spelt the way it is because apparently the domain for Linkin Park was already claimed online. But Hybrid Theory did become the name for their album, which put out hits like In the End and Crawling, and this surge plunged the band into stardom. However, this came with new challenges, because Chester was required to play in concerts and events non-stop for years. And even though the band persisted through with more success such as the Meteora album, and being featured as a big part of the ending in some of the biggest blockbusters, aka Transformers, this all led to an increase in drugs and alcohol to cope with the stress. And this all came crashing down when One More Light came out, and was met with criticism because the album was seen as a departure from the band's original identity. So with all that being said, a personal tragedy then struck, as one of his closest friends, Chris Cornell, who was a lead vocalist for another band, passed away. Now, being his close friend, and topped with external backlash for One More Light, really screwed Chester up. He is quoted as saying that he cannot imagine the world without Chris, and unfortunately this was around the time Chester Bennington would give up on life 2 months later. That's a summary of his tragic life, and I'm not sure if I've done it justice, but learning all this, it contextualizes a whole lot about his music. I remember stating in the Robin Williams video that while it's unfortunate that he had a lot of internal problems, Robin Williams as he existed would probably not exist without it, and I feel the same thing with Chester Bennington. If you listen to a dozen of their notable songs, it really does seem like Chester Bennington's performance was dedicated to venting his problems. It's known that the band's signature song, In the End, was inspired by him being bullied in school for his drugged up skeletal appearance. And it's something most people didn't realize until it was too late. Chester at the end of the day was a good guy. He was a family man, even becoming the godfather to Chris Cornell's kid after his death. And it was known that prior to his passing, he was going to visit a fan of Linkin Park who was dying, and his specific wish was to meet him. Plus, accounts of meeting Chester Bennington that I found online were generally positive. It was said about him when he died that although he could not save himself, he saved many others through inspiring them, as after all, Linkin Park were extremely popular. There's a reason they went so well together with Optimus Prime's speeches. He ended movies just as well as the music on its own. So it's not just the music that inspired many, as literally any kids who saw Transformers in the mid to late 2000s would have had Linkin Park to partially thank. While I didn't see the movies themselves until a bit later, I was obsessed with all the Transformers games that eventually got me to watch the movies. What I've Done, the perfect song to end a movie, and gave The Touch by Stan Busher a run for its money, because after all, which one is the go-to song to end a story? New Divide, less iconic but actually kind of the song I prefer, and Iridescent. Basically a great song to reflect all the trial and tribulations that occurred so far. Because what did we get in Dark of the Moon? Sentinel Prime killed Ironhide, and the stakes were high with its war film approach, and honestly, it was epic seeing the showdown between the Autobots and Decepticons. I suppose we should also thank Steve Jablonsky for the score in general, but who do you think we ended with? It was Chester Bennington and Linkin Park. And I feel that peak effort went with each song in the trilogy. And maybe they could have improved Age of Extinction and The Last Night, had they been there to make a new song. As well as that, I became attached to a bunch of their other songs. In the End, Numb, Burn It Down, Somewhere I Belong, Crawling, etc. All great. I love it. And Chester was certainly a big place in bringing both the Transformers movies and the music to life. His music helped me get through the confusing puzzles in Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis. And I had Somewhere I Belong playing on a non-stop loop for a few hours while I was trying to figure out what combination the stones came in. So with that being said, I admire Chester Bennington, a tragic albeit inspirational musician who helped end a trilogy of explosion-ridden robot movies, and inspired through his music in general. On top of that, he was a family man and friend with whom he was close with, and while he is gone, his impact in the band he sacrificed much of his health for lives on, because after all,
no sacrifice, no victory.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Analyzing Good. I'm JJ Plagiarisms, and until next time, what are stories but mystery boxes?